In this video, I am going to show you how to use a dry brush technique to paint this European goldcrest bird. Hello and welcome to Run My Arts watercolor series. So what is dry brush technique? As you already know, watercolor mainly uses water, so how can it be dry? So basically in this dry brush technique, your brush is not soaked wet but slightly damp. I'll just quickly demonstrate to you how to differentiate between these three different wetness of the watercolor brush. So the first one is a very soaked wet brush. As you can see, it's quite fluffy, and when you paint, the pigment looks quite watery. And the second one, where it's damp, you just squeeze out some water from your brush, and as you observe the brush bristle, it's still in shape but not as fluffy as the soaked wet brush. And as you apply the paint, it's wet but not watery. And as for the dry brush, as you squeeze out the excess water, you will notice the bristle is no longer in a proper shape. You can even play with the bristle, seem flat. And as you apply the paint, you can notice that you struggle with the paint application and it leaves some marks. So I am going to show you how to enhance the dry brush painting technique. So before I move on to the tutorial, this is a tutorial on line and wash technique, painting a winter scenery and chickadee bird. So if you have missed that video, I will leave the link in the description. So the main brush for this painting is Da Vinci Casa Neo. It's a mop style brush and a size 2. And I'm using Canson cold press watercolor paper, 300 grams per square meter. And as you would have noticed, I have already squeezed the excess water from my brush before I dip the brush into the first color, which is Sapphire or burnt umber. Just showing you on a flat palette how the pigment looks like using a dry brush. So I'm going to apply the paint onto the dry surface of the paper, and I have not pre-sketched. I hope you can follow. So just apply that dry paint, trying to make the outline of the goldcrest bird. And once done with the paint application, I am going to use another brush, which is a damp brush, to give the dry pigment some washes. So use the damp brush to activate those dry watercolor pigment. And if you think there's too much wetness in your damp brush, just squeeze out the excess water and continue painting, trying to form the shape of the goldcrest body. So basically this is a very light wash, so you don't have to worry too much on your brush control because there's not too much of wet paint to deal with. So as you can see here, that light wash itself has formed an outline. So the next color is going to be a gray mix, and I'm mixing my sapphire with some sapphire blue, or you can use ultramarine. Mix these two colors and you will arrive at a warm gray. And once again, similar to the first application, I'm just applying it towards the head, wings and other parts of the goldcrest body. So basically this technique is helpful for those who don't wish to deal with a large amount of water or wetness on the paper when they do the painting. So I would say this would be helpful for beginners of watercolor painting, because many beginners are a bit afraid to deal with a lot of liquid on their paper, and they find it stressful to control the paint as well as the water flow. So this could be a good kickstart for those who would like to do a very minimal brush strokes and wetness on the paper. and since there is less liquid on your painting, the painting dries faster, quicker as well. So you get to complete your painting fast. Apart from paint and liquid control, this is also a minimal way of painting because you don't have to work with so many layers, since the painting manages to nail the dark and light values, in other words tonal values, with just one technique. Alright, so next color is burnt sienna with a hint of sapphire to arrive at a slightly dark brown shade. I'm just going to casually paint the twig or branch where the goldcrest bird is standing or gripping on. And this time I am using a flat brush so that I can apply it much easier. Since this is a twig painting, I'm afraid I won't be able to paint it easily with a round brush. And after that I have cleaned my flat brush, and with that damp brush I'm just dragging the pigment from the twig to create more impressions of smaller twigs. So basically the dry thick pigment that was applied earlier seemed to be advantageous. As you drag them with a damp brush, you can create more impressions without even dipping or re-dipping your brush into another load of paint mix. So the next color is yellow ochre, and as usual I am applying that thick paint mix onto the goldcrest body, and after applying I'm going to give it some washes using a clean damp brush. So over here I am just lifting out some pigment with a clean damp brush to leave a bright area for the goldcrest eye painting. More washes is needed onto the head area. And since the goldcrest bird has bright yellow feathers on the crown of its head and slightly at the back of its body as well, so I'm using a lemon yellow shade and applying that paint using a smaller brush because it is just a minimal application as it's not a major color, so you would want to use a smaller bristle brush. Once again back with the clean damp brush to give it some light washes. Just a note that you don't necessarily have to wash or activate the dry pigment on your entire painting. So some part can remain as the dark pigment, dry paint, especially when it comes to finishing touches. And as for the legs of the goldcrest, I am using a mix of black with sapphire. You can just purely use sapphire alone. Time to paint the background, and I'm just going to apply that thick paint of Indian yellow tone and just dragging onto the dry surface of the paper. As you can see, it doesn't result in smooth wash because the paint is applied using the dry brush, and the second color is olive green yellowish. So basically you can use this dry brush technique to arrive at very interesting looking textures or pattern on your painting, especially when it comes to abstract style. And right now, as you can see, I'm just softening the hard edges using a clean damp brush. You can leave it With the hard pattern or marks, I just thought of softening it a bit here and there. I just thought of dropping in some contrasting shade, and this is actually a warm grey that I used earlier on the gold crest painting itself. I'm using a rigger brush. And using the same rigger brush, I am painting the gold crest eye with a darker shade, which is black with a hint of sapphire, because I want it to look way much darker than its feathers color. I'm also extending that same color onto its beak. And with the same paint mix and using the same brush, I'm just trying to paint the other side of its wing, as well as more feathered textures on the crown of its head, as well as the back of its body. Applying the same paint to darken some of the areas which appears darker or has a shadow, as well as some feather textures. I've also extended the same paint mix onto the branch and twigs. In fact, I am creating extra twigs using the rigger brush. So in order to create some highlights as finishing touches onto the gold crest body, I'm using white gouache paint as usual. And since this is gouache, it is much more easier to use the dry brush technique. Given the nature of gouache paints that are not transparent but opaque, and they are also thick in texture. I think by now, with the application of gouache, you would definitely agree how realistic this bird looks. And with this, I am done painting the European gold crest bird. So how do you find this painting technique? I think you would definitely agree that there was very less water or liquid involved, so my paper hardly had warps. And I love the way the textures and marks were created effortlessly using the dry brush technique. So once in a while, give this method a go. You'll definitely enjoy the process. And if you liked this tutorial, do hit the like and share button, and also subscribe to my channel. So see you again in another tutorial. Bye.